Hi, welcome to the Global Networking Show. It's November and we've got another great show for you. I'm joined by Ivan Meisner and our producer Inga Dexnay. Ivan.
Hey, thank you very much. It's great to be on another show. I want to remind everyone that you can watch our show on our YouTube channel, and you can also go to the globalnetworkingshow.com. That's globalnetworkingshow.com. And I'd like to turn it over to Inga Dexnay, our producer. Inga?
Hi. Thank you, Ivan. So you can tweet your questions using hashtag GNetShow, or you can post your questions below on Google Plus or YouTube. And please don't be shy and submit your questions to Ivan and Andy and to our guests.
So I don't know about you, but sometimes you read a business book that really gets you thinking and really captures your imagination. And that happened to me recently when I read the book Not Knowing by our guests tonight, Stephen D'Souza and Deanna Renner. Now, I've known Stephen for a number of years. He was one of my first clients when he was head of talent management at Merrill Lynch, brought me in there, and we've stayed in touch. He's written a range of excellent books on subjects as broad as diversity, networking, and now not knowing. Deanna I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, and in true global networking show fashion, I still haven't because we can't hear her. And ironically, we don't know what to do about it. I can see Deanna there. Deanna, give us a wave.
Hi.
Oh, we missed you.
Okay, great.
We couldn't hear Deanna for the last 25 minutes while we've been trying to go live, but as if by magic, she's appeared. And that just shows that sometimes you don't know what to do, but it's the best way to be. And that's the perfect lead-in to our book. So it's a fantastic book, this book on not knowing, written by Stephen, who's an Englishman, travels all over the world speaking about the topics we talked about, and Deanna, who's in Australia. So we truly are the Global Networking Show tonight. Ivan.
Hey, thank you. So I've got the first question, and I've got to ask you both, what led you to write a book on the topic of not knowing?
Ivan, the idea came from both our own lives, and Deanna will share for her own story, but really it was informed by our own experience and our own struggles with not knowing. One I was thinking, what is there a topic that's really relevant and that is relevant for our times? And I didn't know, what would that topic be? And then I discovered it's the actual struggle of not knowing that is the actual pertinent topic of our times. And I think it's something that we don't face only in business, but that we face in our health, we face in our relationships, and many areas of our lives. And so the topic came really from our lived experience. Deanna's experience much more visceral than mine in her story. So I'll hand over to Deanna just to share something about why this topic was relevant to her.
Well, actually, Stephen and I connected at Harvard University where we met, and we had some great conversations. I think our joint experience, our similar experiences of having lived overseas and having our parents having migrated to another country is what I think was one of the main connection points for us. And that experience of moving into a new territory, whether it's physically moving into a new country which is unfamiliar, and the struggle around developing the ability to survive and thrive was the starting point for our conversations. So not knowing is basically how do we venture into the unknown, and we both had very strong experiences in our personal lives.
So I got to ask, when you talk to people, usually there's an expression that many people use: knowledge is power. That when you have information, you're in a much better position. So how do you sort of counterbalance the power of not knowing versus this sort of counterintuitive not knowing versus the sort of strongly felt sense that knowledge is power and you've got to know things?
One of the things that we really strongly say in the book, Ivan, is that knowledge is powerful, and we're not discounting knowledge. We think there's great value in knowledge, But we argue that society already privileges knowledge. So from a young age, we're rewarded on what we know, from school, achieving success in our academic studies, and then in the workplace, for what we know. But we think that although knowledge is powerful, there's a flip side to that. And knowledge can also be dangerous because it can lead to hubris, or it can lead to a narrow point of view. And that we're saying that the challenges we're facing today aren't simply complicated challenges where the answer's knowable or the answers could be discoverable, but they're complex challenges that require us to embrace the fact that no one person has the answers, and that maybe the answers are unknowable.
So how do you get people to engage with that message? You know, Ivan said that the idea of not knowing is counterintuitive. You talked about it being taught at school. You know, we're rewarded for knowledge. How do you get people to be comfortable with the notion to embrace your lack of knowledge, embrace your ignorance, if you like, and really leverage that to achieve things you might not do, you might miss otherwise?
Well, first of all, it's really important to understand the distinction between situations in which it is okay to know and to seek knowledge, situations which are knowable, problems that can be fixed, and situations which are more complex. Once we understand that distinction, then we can tap into a different mindset. So encouraging people to, first of all, become aware of what happens to them when they are in that new space, when they're facing with a really complex question where the answer doesn't come easily. There are natural reactions which appear at that stage. We call that stage the edge. What happens to us when we come to the edge of our competence and our confidence, and becoming aware of those feelings and not shying away from them, not allowing those to take over. So when we enter into a room full of strangers, rather than fearfully retreating into a corner, how do we become familiar with that feeling and hold it? By holding it, by facing it, I think we're giving ourselves the option of another reaction, another option. And so that's really the first step in our book in becoming more aware of what happens to us at that edge.
It's interesting. I gave a talk today, and during that talk I was covering the point about how many people don't ask for referrals because they feel vulnerable, they feel weak. And I made the point about presenting what you've accomplished with confidence. And someone commented at that point and said, oh yes, it's really important that you always present yourself as successful. And I challenged him on that, because I think that you don't cover up things where you're inadequate, and sometimes it's better to say I don't know, but people struggle with that. So you know, you talk about going into a networking event, going into a room full of strangers. Can we encourage people that actually culturally it's okay to say I don't know, but in a way which allows you to learn without looking weak and vulnerable?
So, Andy, you really accord with your point about vulnerability as a form of allowing us to connect. So one of my colleagues, he wrote a book called Why Should Anyone Be Led by You at London Business School. And the main research or the finding of this book was that the best leaders selectively reveal their humanness in a way that enables others to relate to them and to connect to them. So we often see this with leaders giving speeches and storytelling, maybe disclosing something about their children or something a little bit more personal. But that allows us to make sure that we feel some form of human warmth and connection towards them. And alternatively, when they don't, and when they're too perfect, in the case of the questioner just sharing only their successes, there's something missing, and perhaps we don't trust them as authentic. In terms of revealing something about saying I don't know, we're not advocating going into a high-pressure situation where the stakes are high and saying I don't know, because that could deauthorize you and remove your credibility. But what we are saying is that in some situations, and it might be trying it out in safer situations, perhaps not immediately giving or pretending to know when you don't know, which can also destroy trust and relationship, but being able to spend a moment and pausing, reflecting, and going more into inquiry. Tell me more about this. I'm curious. I don't have all the answers, but let me find out. So we're talking here about making a space for not knowing rather than immediately pretending to know or relying on knowledge that perhaps is outdated.
I think you make a good point, and regarding the person that said to Andy that it's very important to come across as confident, I think it is important to come across as confident and knowledgeable, and at the same time, that if there is something you don't know, to say, I don't have the answer to that. I can get back to you with the answer to that if you think you can. I had a mentor when I was very young in college who said to me, look, you don't have to know everything. You just need to know where to find the answers. So, create a network of information. That was before Google, of course. Create a network of information, people that you can go to, someone that you can ask that can help you to get the answers that you need, but you don't need to know everything. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. And I do that, I do that publicly, and I feel like I know the topic of networking pretty well. Yet, if there's something I don't know, you just say so.
Well, it takes courage, Ivan. I think what we're talking about is actually an act of courage. The simple words, I don't know. We're risking credibility. So stepping into that space where we are becoming more vulnerable is an act of courage.
See, we at the moment don't know what you're thinking, for those of you watching the show, so please ask your questions as well. Inga, can you just remind people how they can do that?
Sure. Yes, please post your questions in Google+, or you can tweet at us using #GNetShow. Thank you.
Just going back to Ivan's last point and Deanna's response, can you guys tell us how should people approach their networks best in order to plug those gaps in their knowledge? What approaches do you find work best?
One of the things is we have in the book we make 4 main points to really use not knowing in a practical way, and to really apply it. But these aren't skills that we think are additions, but we call them negative capabilities, and we take that phrase from the English poet John Keats, who wrote about the ability to be in mystery and to tolerate uncertainty without irritable reaching after fact and reason. So an example of this, Andy, is one of the first principles that we have is empty your cup, and how that relates to networking and meeting people is often we have many preconceptions about who and what is useful to us. So if I'm in a situation, I might say that person doesn't appear to be directly valuable for me in terms of a contact, or immediately I'm making a stereotype and a judgment, and I'm acting on that. And we're both aware of the role of unconscious bias in doing that. So I think one of the first things is recognizing how we come already loaded in our listening for who is valuable, and that makes us discriminate, whereas that potentially could be a very valuable connection. And to take it more deeper, even the fact that emptying your cup is about, do we really know what the concept of networking is? When I'm giving a talk about networking, I often start with adopting the empty your cup principle to what people think about networking as a means of building relationship. Often it's confused with manipulation, or it's confused with transactional relationship only, or very short term in its viewpoint. So this first principle is adopting that open mindset and allowing the possibility of a new connection that wouldn't have been available before.
And the next... Sorry, Andy.
Please carry on, Deanna.
I was just going to build on what Stephen was sharing and mention the second point, which is what we call close your eyes to see. And it's really about encouraging people to collect data using all their 5 senses. So again, going back to that room full of strangers, once you've let go of your judgments and preconceptions and assumptions, then how do you really notice? How do you really hear? Tap into your senses. How do you listen in a way that goes beyond your normal defaults? So that is a really important point which can ground us in the present moment, rather than tap into the fear that may kick in at that point.
In the book, you talk about the 4 stages of listening, and I found that really quite fascinating. I talk a lot about listening for people rather than listening to them. Stephen Covey talked about active listening rather than passive listening. Perhaps one of you could share a little bit about those 4 stages of listening, particularly in that networking context.
Yes, the 4 stages of listening that we refer to in the book comes from the work of Otto Scharmer at MIT. And he developed something called presencing, which is being present, but also sensing into the future. So he says we can't only learn from the past, but we can learn from the future as it emerges. And one of the key things for that is about developing a new capacity to listen. An example of why this is so important is in the book we talk about doctors and some research that was done by Dr. Howard Beckman and his colleagues at the University of Rochester. And he said that doctors typically wait only 23 seconds before interrupting a patient and redirecting the conversation. Whereas if they had waited only another 6 seconds before asking the question, many more patients would have brought up other important issues. So Otto Scharmer says the real key skill of creating something new from possibility is this ability to have something he calls generative listening. How he distinguishes it in a networking situation, he says either we're downloading, which is when we listen to reconfirm our judgments. For example, I know that already, so we're only looking to confirm what we already know. Or we're listening for facts and gathering more data and for things that we don't know, but it's very much a factual. He talks about empathic listening, which is listening with the whole heart, engaging in dialogue, paying attention. But what we're really concerned with a 4th category called generative listening, which he says is connecting at a deeper level than just and larger than ourselves. It's very hard to describe, but it's listening with the whole presence. But it's listening for what's wanting to be said or what's wanting to be born in the conversation. And that takes a very acute type of listening. So it's not only listening for what's being said, but what's wanting to come and arise from that conversation. So it's coming from a deeper space, which he refers to as the bottom of the U, or in Zen they would call the fertile void.
So Inga, I think we have a question from somebody I know.
Inga, you're on mute.
Your mic is off, Inga.
Sorry, yeah. I got too excited. We have a comment from someone you know, from Beth, and she is saying, I love how you have turned something we might see as a weakness or a deficit, not knowing, into a strength. Great shift of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear their comment on that and this. I have for many years, Stephen and Deanna, told people that ignorance on fire is better than knowledge on ice. That sometimes not knowing, but when you're on fire and excited, sometimes can actually do a better job in something than somebody who supposedly is knowledgeable, but they're not doing anything with that knowledge. So how would you respond to that and to Beth's comment?
Look, it's exciting. It's exciting for us because it is a counterintuitive concept, and Andy, you said that right at the beginning of this conversation. So it is counterintuitive. However, it's been around from the beginning of mankind. If you look at spiritual traditions, Christianity, Buddhism, they do embrace not knowing, unknowing, the unknown. Is a great source of mystery, and I think what's happened in the Western world recently, the last few centuries, is that we've elevated knowledge to a status that it potentially doesn't deserve, and so what we've done is we've forgotten about the mystery, the beauty in the unknown, whilst also acknowledging it can be frightening. So it's really about redressing that balance. And also bringing it practically into the business domain to really encourage people to, as Ivan was saying, not to hold knowledge lightly, and to be open to the questions, not as a source of ignorance, but as a source of learning.
I'd like to build on what Deanna is saying. I think it's what we're trying to do is broaden the scope of what is knowledge. So really we're saying that not knowing is knowledge, but it's a deeper knowing. It's knowing that isn't just book learning or knowing that comes from the memorization of facts or figures, but it's that we're looking at accessing a deeper knowing, which comes from suspending your judgment or emptying your cup. It comes from closing your eyes in order to see, as Paul Gauguin, the artist, said. It comes from risking and taking leaps into the dark. And it comes from delighting in the fact that we were in charge, but we're not necessarily in control in our lives. And facing that reality gives us more choice and allows us to come from a position of possibility, from curiosity rather than fear, and from learning rather than just knowledge. So I think it's broadening the definition of knowledge to take into account a much more richer source of knowledge rather than just what Rumi would call plumbing learning, which comes just from the outside.
Along that line, slightly off center of that, I want to talk about one's opinion versus knowledge, because oftentimes I see people present their opinion as knowledge, and so you're all wrong, I'm all right, and it's because, or it's based on an opinion as opposed to really true knowledge. Comment on that. Comment on that concept, if you would.
To me, it sounds like overconfidence. And we do speak about this in the book. We write about this in the book, and it's really experts in particular that are prone to becoming overconfident in relying on what they already know. So there's been research done to show how experts overestimate what they know. And the deeper their knowledge becomes, the narrower their view, the narrower their ability to see. However, you may also refer to people who may be overly confident despite the lack of knowledge, and that is hubris. So I guess it depends on the person, and there are cultural implications, gender implications to that. Yeah, it's an interesting point.
We have a question as well. So Inga, can you just share that with us?
Yes, sure. So we have a question from Fidel McGreen, and it is this not knowing about trusting our intuition?
I think it's a really interesting question, because I've heard a lot of people speak about the power of trusting your intuition in the past and where it's taken them. So what's the difference, and where does your intuition come into this, and how do you know when to listen to that and when to explore further?
We talk about intuition and really the power of silence, the power of pausing in order to discover something new. And we give the example of the Quaker tradition, in which rather than simply struggle with looking at dilemmas from a purely factual point of view, they'll spend time in silence and they'll cultivate this period of reflection and space where something new can emerge. But importantly, they also gather around them a group of friends, and literally they are the society of friends. And they're people that are there not just to give them affirmation on their point of view, but to be critical friends in a way, to give them the space, but also to help them discern, is this the right idea? And that is a test really for their own intuition. So I think just following our impulse can sometimes lead to solipsism, can lead to feeling more uncertain. But cultivating the quality of silence, cultivating the ability to pause and take time out, and then to test that in conjunction with others that are trusted advisors, or I think that's a real way that we see intuition being supported and harnessed.
One of the most powerful ways of networking, in my experience, is mastermind groups, where you surround yourself with peers who meet on a regular basis and challenge you and help you find solutions to the challenges that you're facing. So that's very much what you're outlining there in that tradition, isn't it, Stephen?
Yeah, we talk about Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish film director, and he described the filmmaking process as throwing a spear into the dark. He said the spear and throwing it is his intuition, where he doesn't know where it will go, and then he uses his intellect to find the sphere. So in terms of producing the film and getting it right. But we think there's a huge place for intuition. Much of our knowledge and much of the data that we're surrounded by, the stimulus, is outside of our conscious awareness. And by trusting that, moving from control to trust, a lot more is one of the key points that we make in the book.
Ivan, we're coming close to the end, but Ivan, you need to unmute yourself.
I have another question for you. I studied under Dr. Warren Bennis at the University of Southern California, and one of the things he talked about that I really find fascinating is the concept of contextual intelligence. So let me spin that topic to contextual knowledge. People come across from different perspectives with the knowledge they have. In your book, how did you address that issue where people are coming from a different perspective of knowledge and intelligence, and they're dealing with the same issue but from a different context?
Well, we, as you would have seen in the book, we have so many stories from people in different professions, different contexts, different ages, cultures. We value this diversity because the journey into not knowing, into the unknown, is personal to everyone. It is something that one has to discover and create for oneself. We all have our own edges to the unknown, our own reactions, and our own predispositions. So we have to all find our own way. And this is why it's so important to understand the history that has made us into who we are today, and also to allow us to discover our own path ahead. So as we say in the book, the path is made by walking. It's in that diversity of experiences, whether it's a mastermind meeting or whether it's in a society of friends, where the gold is. Even though everyone is on their own journey, I think you cannot do this on your own. The diversity and the connection with your network, with your friends, with your family, their support is really valuable in opening up the possibility, discovering the possibility.
We've got just a couple of minutes of the show left. So sorry, Ivan. I just wanted to, for people who are listening to this for the first time, I know that when I was reading the book, I thought this is all fascinating. This is brilliant. How do I apply this? How do I get started putting this into practice? And you know, it came towards the end of the book where I started to really understand that. So maybe just to round off, maybe you could give us 2 or 3 simple, effective steps that people can take to start embracing their ignorance, go back to that, embracing their lack of knowing, and to really apply this, particularly with their networking in mind.
I think one of Jen will have, please add to this, I think one of the most important things that we say is the leap into the dark, and that means that you don't have to get it right before you take action. Part of not knowing is experimenting, and we talk about the full archetype in tarot. It's an archetype of lightness and levity, and we think this is an important quality, humor and lightness, and going into the unknown without having to be perfect, reaching out and taking this risk to connect with others. So I think this sense of learning and by doing, I think, is an important message of the book, and we share practical ways in order to do that and to support yourself with compassion as you go into the unknown, rather than thinking you have to do things without mistake or that you will never be rejected. So we look at things from a realistic perspective, but also encourage people to take action and to learn from improvising and from experimenting.
Well, we're almost out of time. Deanna, do you have any closing thoughts?
Run safe to fail experiments, as many as you can. Little steps. There's no need to to throw yourself over the edge. Just dip your toes into the water. Try something different. See what happens. Try again, and don't do this alone. Find a friend. You know, you're not alone. this is a shared human experience. So connect with others and play, as Stephen was saying.
Excellent. Well, for everyone on the show today that would like to take a look at a copy of the book, Not Knowing, you can go to notknowingbook.com. That's notknowingbook.com. I know the book is available at amazon.com. And I'd like to thank Deanna, Stephen, Inga, and of course my co-host, Andy Lapata, for today's show. Andy?
Thank you, Ivan. I think it's been a fascinating show, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. Don't forget, connect with us online. We've got a Facebook page, we're on Twitter, and there's globalnetworkingshow.com. So come and sign up there and watch previous shows as well, because I think both Stephen and Deanna have been fascinating guests, and they follow a fine tradition over the last 14 months or so of some excellent guests. So please come and have a look online and watch the other videos. YouTube as well, of course.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.